A comment?
Well, I can talk about my own.
That's what I'd like. I think, yes.
No, here, you can.
Seeing my drawings in the context of the other entries, that I'm aware of a sort of striking unknowingness about my work. But of course, one has to confess that that's deliberate. And I have to put it in the context of ideas at the time it was designed, as Richard Meier did in the time that he wrote the program. And my context was as follows, that there had been a previous competition for a house, and the prizes were given, everybody's in this room, so that, and all the things I've said to them already. The prizes seem to me to be given for the evasion of the problem. That is that were there a real superstar, he would be actually asking for a real house from a person whose language was capable of producing something. And consequently, I felt that any submission to a subsequent competition should actually face the problem frontally. And secondly, the question of knowingness and unknowingness is the question of using historical devices as props, both by other draftsmen as devices in the Beaux-Arts way, and of course with my generation who were recipients at the end of the Beaux-Arts, to use a previous language outside its context still seems immoral. I seem to have lost sound. Or okay? No. That sounds all right. And therefore, there were very great temptations to once one had got onto the notion of a wall, that the drawings would have been more elegant, more fetching, had the wall being an antique wall. And I was urged to make the wall a piece of a Roman wall. But in the end I decided to go for the very ordinary, because in fact, and this is the third part of the context, I'd been looking at intersections, in decayed intersections in the old centre part of Cambridge, Massachusetts, where the original houses, which had had certain devices to protect them from the street, and certain pleasures were possible in the original houses, those pleasures had been eroded, and the language therefore become meaningless, or largely meaningless, or merely what's the word I want? Triggering off memories of that time. And looked at possible ways of modifying existing corners and thinking about what happened at corners, which was different from what happened in the public domain of things that happened at corners that didn't happen on the rest of the street. So that in a sense I was well prepared. The language itself, is perfectly obviously an extension of the drawings we already showed here for an industrial design, industrial headquarters building, which Peter Cook showed the separation drawings of coloured baskets of steel structures. And the only advance there was that as the intention of the outer fabric is to create a distance, a screening between those inside and those outside, and therefore the fabric is not entirely, from a structural point of view, it's largely redundant. And how do you give to the language of a strut system, how do you indicate that it's largely redundant to prevent those who are knowing from reading it as a true structure? And by separating out the column from the main slabs, it was possible to weave these struts around the building. That is, they're pinned on the backs of the columns so that as you went around a square, they're alternatively one. So there's this tiny advance in the development of this, what is intended to be a very fragile and pretty language. And of course, once you think of it painting it yellow, it entrains one into notions of the Golden Pavilion and so on. And it seemed appropriate in a Japanese competition not to suppress that particular overtone. So that you could say that in the end I denied one of the first principles, which was to have no quotation. You know, because that what was happening in the ones that were collaging from Richard Meier is, you might say, it's a second replay of the language. And of course, this is an argument we've had between us, that I'd always imagined that the promise of modern architecture that distinguished it from Edwardian architecture was that it should always be fresh. That is, it would try to seem as if it was newly grown. And of course, this process had already started to lose its drive very early on in the modern movement. That is, that one has to regard Terani as a mannered architect, and therefore you get Peter Eisenman producing a mannered version of a mannered architect, and then you have the third generation producing a mannered version of a mannered version of an impulse, which was not all that long time ago, 1913, 1914, the original impulses towards this freshness. And it seems to me the blood of modern architecture is getting extraordinarily thin, you know, and that invention is still the key to, that is, dear old Palladio sweated blood to make that building, and it's really very easy to make a measured drawing, you know, and somehow this is, so that there's a sort of weird, in the end I denied all that argument by accepting that that once one wanted it yellow, it would immediately connect one to existing pavilions in Japan, which seemed appropriate to this competition in a way that flavoring slightly denies the supposedly rigorous morality that lay behind the design. I enjoyed doing it very much. And it's full of internal cribs from my wife, of course, but internal cribbing is perfectly respectable.
Peter, would you like to say?
Fairly loud voice. I don't really want to say very much about it because it's going to form part of my lecture on Tuesday, except just a few observations. One, I think I was pleased to hear Richard Meier say that he hoped that the competition would be used as a kind of vehicle for doing what you enjoy doing rather than pitching it at Richard. In fact, I think we, as much as any other group of people, sort of did cross our minds whether Richard Meier would like our kind of thing and if therefore it was worth bothering. And we said, well, what the hell? It's an excuse to re-quote some of our own preoccupations. And I think those of you who will visit, I'm making my sort of plug now for next week's exhibition called 40 London Architects, I think of which about 8 are amongst the prize winners or something horrendous. I mean, there are probably 12 people in this room amongst the list that you've read out, which there's something terribly incestuous about it all. Speaking as one student of Peter Smithson and some of my students or ex-students amongst and cronies amongst the list, I mean, there's that aspect. Just talking about the scheme, I think we were preoccupied with almost the opposite thing of that of Peter's, and it struck me very much when one sees the two drawings at close quarters, where his has this incredible sort of magic simplicity. We couldn't do that. And our scheme is to do with layering. And I think the clue to it is that it's a layering of the unlike with the unlike with the unlike with the unlike, so that in a sense we depart from as near as we could make a sort of neo-rational plan. And as soon as we've established the rationale of the plan, the matrix of the plan, we start to erode it. Even one of the two lines defining the matrix is eroded almost before it starts, and that is very important. As soon as we set up a piece of the matrix in one dimension, which appears to be repeating itself in a plan and just extending itself upwards, we burrow into it. As soon as we state a piece of organization that appears to have one kind of discipline, for instance, Christie, well, there's always this business of sort of things disappearing and then reappearing. We do a piece of that we hope at first sight would appear to be expressionist, but if you look closely at it, it's in fact highly organized. And the collar, the little path that goes around the edge, appears to be a sort of idiot's guide to what the building is about. But in fact, it just peters out as it gets 3/4 of the way around. And I think this isn't pure cynicism. I mean, it's using such erection of a thing and then digging away at it in order to try to, sounds pompous to say, to discover the nature of it. I mean, one is trying to be concerned with vocabulary, which I've recently, the last year, said this is my major concern. And the other thing of simply re-quoting some of the things, and you'll see by both of our panels in next week's exhibitions, which continue with the conversation. So that, for instance, the room without the doors and windows is a sort of hobby horse of mine for the last 5 years, of this notion of one day doing a building that just simply goes from solid to total translucency and back again, except that it could only be sort of half of that because of the rest of the scheme. The arbor is a sort of extended quote, slightly inspired, I must admit, by some things I saw at Cooper Union a couple of months ago, where I found other people were into arbor makers. Fascinating, 3,000 arbor. The end groundwork is more or less exactly a sort of continuation of Christine's ground plan of the Roosevelt scheme, which is the third part of that scheme. And there are other quotes, which again, quoting, I'd like to borrow your phrase, sort of cribbing from oneself. But I think there is that total fundamental difference of approach which strikes me very much, which is ours is layering and picking and nibbling and burrowing, and yours just does it. To which one bows, you know, as a sort of pure thing to do. But really, that's all I want to say about it, because I've got Tuesday evening to meander on. Richard, I would like to comment that there are, as I say, about really a horrendously large proportion of that list sitting in
Mark down here. I think I've got the same problem about next Tuesday, and I've got so little to show.
Okay.
I've completed so far.
Well,
the thing about it was that we have no vocabulary. All we're trying to do is create just magic into a building by literally creating a three-dimensional magic space. And the plans you criticize you have to show because the building is 2 meters wide, and you have to show you have to live in 2 meters wide.
You can't hear, Tom.
Can't hear a word. Sorry. Well, I was making the same excuse as you do that, and saying that the only thing we were trying to do was create a magic building that you can enjoy living in, simply because you can create effects for pondering things, and have an effect, and exist in a vista, and enjoy a visual vista without at the same time ruining it. So you enjoyed it in secret, and you lived in secret, and your building could vanish when you weren't there, and be there when you were there. That's all we're trying to do.
Would like to say something? Yes.
I find it. I feel that the house on the intersection is a very straightforward problem, and most of the scheme look quite beyond it. And I wonder what.
You see the other 400.
Oh,
525.
I wonder what should be so mysterious about the house on the intersection. It's a nice problem, and historically there has never been any real solution to the problem. So why doesn't somebody try to make very straightforward reason to it? I mean, that's the funny thing about late, after 68, that people are always incredibly desperate to find a profoundly original solution to anything. And if you look historically, architecture was always something rather subtle, and which was in the language, in the modulation of a language, but not so much in the recomposition of a language as such, which would try to find totally new language, which I think in a way is an expression of nowadays confusion.
I found it rather stupid and enormously self-indulgent competition. I'd like to,
Very nice.
I don't agree with you. But I didn't agree with most of what you said this morning. So, but what I'd like to ask Richard. Well, no, I'm asking the question. Asking a question.
I think
Let me finish the question, then I'll answer your
no, my question is just for you to say why you think that it's a stupid and self-indulgent.
Stupid and extremely self-indulgent. Stupid first, because I think that, and this is something that Peter Smithson said earlier on, I think that the value, when he commented on the earlier competition, which was run by the same cornflake packet magazine, that the value, I mean, I answered your question halfway through asking you one. You realize this, Richard. Thank you. So I might forget the end of my question to you, that's my problem. That the stupidity of the thing was that an intersection so loosely defined was really not a problem. You see, when it's picking up God, or chicken feed, or a bus stop, then in fact, even though you don't have to define intersection in physical terms, you don't have to say it's a crossroads or a three-way, or you must realize it's a road rather than a crossing of ideas or something. That to write that, this is the stupid bit, to write, I don't know who wrote it, did you write the competition? No.
Oh, yes, no, I wrote the competition.
You wrote it?
Oh, yes.
Jolly good. Keep the... keep that as if crossed across you. That's Subjugium essay. The point about stupidity of it was that I felt that an intersection, if in fact competitions are to be varied, as Peter said, that for a superstar it was too empty to actually make a competition, that earlier one. Now for this one, to say intersection without being in a way constrictive or constructively expansive as to what the intersection was, whether it was time or exchange or anything, in fact probably allowed a great, well I think it was stupid because it probably allowed a lot of people to go in for it who were wasting their time anyway. Now on the dangerously and extremely self-indulgent, it obviously allowed a lot of very worthwhile people to go in for it and waste their time. Because the intersection element of the schemes we've seen, many of which, some of which, I thought were smashing, in fact, were at the level that what they did, in effect, was overindulgent in so much as in no case, even in the chicken shit one, had the scheme that they produced any further effect on the intersection. So it was, in a way, some were physical, some were spiritual, and some were social band-aids, but only that. So we could talk about the niceness in the term of accuracy. We could talk about additional delight or subtlety, but the encouragement to be sort of overindulgent, where I, at the moment, don't think, and this began the last bit that people said about how modern architecture, the blood was getting awfully thin. I really don't think that worthwhile people have time to waste. And I think that there was overindulgence in this competition, almost through not extremely, but slightly clever sort of smokescreen in the way that the thing must have been written. And if I can just now get back to that was the answer to the question. Because if I get back on my question, you see, the first little bit was, would you have entered? And then there were bits that make me think it might have done, because if you looked at that, and I don't think it was a very, if it was full, it was shallow. If it wasn't complete, it was unfair. Your answer to the lady about the aluminium trim in the hospital, which admittedly, Smithson and myself weren't quite clear how much it is hospital or home or, one day in, one day out. But if you think of the lower bank where you had the motorway, and I won't put it off the postcard, but you said there was recognition of the angle of the motorway by the stepping out. There was a long way from that motorway. You said earlier it was a desperate sight. The thing could have been, in all the photographs, you wouldn't know whether the thing was angled along or straight unless you were in a car going at speed, therefore you weren't going in there. So the attention to the motorway had a sort of architectonic quality, which I wasn't clear. And then that question came up. Now, the photograph of the interior may have been a passageway or one of the real hospital wards, where there was a big aluminium reveal inside, and there was all this shiny thing. And you said, well, the business, the aluminium and the cladding, was that we wanted to make this.
I didn't want to answer the question at that time.
Well, can I remind you how you didn't answer?
No, I know I didn't answer.
Well, you did a half. Can I remind you of a non-answer?
Yes,
because you did say there were lots of things together. It wasn't just a one place. We wanted people to realize it was the city. There was workshops, there was living, there was care, etc., etc. But of course, back to that very loose argument earlier in the week about the city, is that some of the things make it bearable. It's the fact that the grain is so cruddy. I mean, the grain does vary, and so you don't, even though you know you're with 10 other million people, that little bit when you're healthy, you can afford the dirt on the sill. Though that bit when you're trying to slide down the pole to get in the fire engine, put out the fire, must be polished. So there was that confusion, which may come back onto the point of the question. And I think now I've got a second question. That's that question. Would you have entered it, and why, in fact, or was in fact some of the elements in that hospital thing, and your answers or non-answers, relevant to what you thought the value was of that competition, which I do find, as self-indulgent and almost indictably decadent.
Well, I can't answer whether I would have done the competition because I doubt I would have because of my involvement with other things at that time. If I had read the brief, I might have been interested in the competition. I personally would be more interested in competitions which, at least in the way in which they're structured, result in more than simply publication of that as a work, unless the competition had something to do with ideas that I was working on in something else at the time, and it was relative. Yes, it just forces you to bring them to some point. But just exactly, yeah. I just you see, I happen to, of course, I would, but I disagree with you that it's a very decadent competition. I don't think it is in the way in which it was written. I think that the brief was much more specific, in fact, than most of the or many of the entries that came from students here, and it was obvious that some class was participating in it by the nature of the presentation, which was of a very high level compared with the students from other countries. But nevertheless, I think it was a worthwhile competition for me, and if I were to write the brief again, I don't think I would change it and make it more specific, as you suggest, because I think it denies one aspect of a competition like this, in that it doesn't have to be specific, and to make it specific makes it artificial, to give it a specific situation and a specific definition to what kind of intersection. It's not that kind of competition. Student problems, which often run in that way, I think may be valuable learning experiences in one respect, but they usually don't deal with general ideas, which a competition like this does allow one to deal with. And maybe that's why some people felt that here it was worthwhile doing. Certainly, I was encouraged by the what seemed to me to be enthusiastic response of those who entered it. In relation to the Bronx project, the school or hospital for mentally retarded children, which I showed you, one of the problems, as I'm sure you well know, of looking at a building through slides of uncompleted work and insufficient drawings, is that you get a fragment, you get an image, and a somewhat fleeting image of what the work is like. Obviously, the only interior photograph was the one looking through the photograph through the courtyard, because for the most part there was nothing even resembling completion there. So really what one is showing is a skin of the building, partially landscaped and totally not in use. And one's preoccupation with the way in which this aluminum cladding varies in terms of the definition and the whole breakdown of scale as one moves from public spaces to more private spaces, and the way in which the same material then becomes modified according to the kinds of places which it encloses and defines. This was a concern, and I think that this was is the whole way in which one reads the building from entry facade through to interior facade of the public spaces, through the courtyard, from 12-foot wide windows to 5'9" wide panels to 2'3" in terms of the way in which the spaces then break down in scale, and then the way in which the glazed surfaces are modified against the more solid surfaces gives an articulation of the various kinds of activities that take place there. Now, you might do it in a totally different way. This is what we felt was an important way of examining within one building the kind of complex nature of the program and how the incredible